Hello. Welcome to this week's travels as we travel through the Word. We are on week 21, May 23rd through the 29th. Our Old Testament travels include 2 Samuel 13 through 24, and then we did 1 Chronicles 21. We also did Psalms 3, 18, 34, and 63. And that our New Testament travels included Romans 1 through 4. So, you know how it works. I give you a few little of my notes from my studies, and then I tell you how I saw myself in the Word, ask you a question so that we can ensure that you are seeing yourself in the Word. Remember, that's the most important part. And then we go from there. We'll end this week's travels. So, let's start with 2 Samuel chapter 13. Now, remember, it was a lot going on with David and, Saul chasing him and then him becoming king, the whole thing. And David and all of his, God was with David and he was, like victory, one war victory after another. Well, now there's trouble in the family. So, chapter 13 starts off with Amnon who rapes Tamar. Polygamy has now come back to haunt David because Amnon is David's son, okay? Tamar is David's daughter, but they have different mothers. So he was in love with his half-sister, and he, did what he shouldn't have done. And so what he did basically ruined her life, but her brother, who had David for a father and had the same mother as Tamar, he was like, oh, that's not happening on my watch. Revenge is mine. So David did nothing to discipline Amnon for what he did, okay? That's going to come back to haunt him, okay? And so Amnon was kind of like his dad. He was blinded by lust, and lust is what got him in trouble. Remember, lust is what got David in trouble with Bathsheba, where he ended up having Bathsheba, had a baby with her, the baby died, had Bathsheba's husband killed, the whole nine, all over lust. So this is going to come back to bite David in the butt. But eventually what happens is Absalom waited a couple years, and 2 years, as a matter of fact, and he sets up a whole scheme in order to get Amnon to his house. And when he did, he killed him. And then Absalom ran away. And then you get to chapter 14. Now remember, Absalom had run away, right? So Absalom had run away with his maternal grandfathers where he went. And so Joab, who is David's army commander, he decides, we really need to, get this back together. Like the family needs to be back together. This isn't good. And so he set it up so that Absalom, would come back with David. Now, here's the thing about Absalom. They said Absalom was so handsome, like he didn't have a single physical flaw. Can you imagine it? Not a single physical flaw. But the biggest flaw of all wasn't physical. It was an inner flaw. It was a character flaw. Pride was it. It was pride. And so that was going to come back to haunt him. And then you get to chapter 15, and Absalom plotted to do what? Steal his father's throne. This is that pride coming back. Okay, so Absalom, remember I told you how handsome he was. Okay, his physical features helped him win the heart of the people. He won the hearts of the people. And so 4 years later, he's setting things up. He's going from town to town, kind of like what we would consider shaking hands and kissing babies. He does that, and he declares himself king. And he has a lot of the people behind him. David ends up going on the run, okay? And so then you get to chapter 16, and Ziba, who was Mephibosheth's servant. Now, Mephibosheth was Jonathan's child. Remember last week we found Jonathan, son of Saul, but Jonathan and David were best friends. They made a pact with each other. I always take care of your family. You take care of mine. So Ziba, who was Mephibosheth's servant, Ziba helps David, okay? And then there was a whole situation with the advisors. David sent someone into Absalom's camp as an advisor to trick him. So all these people think they know what's going on. Like they're setting up all these plans, not realizing that, you know what they're doing? Working on the providence of God. So it's like we make these plans and we think we're doing something. I'm doing this and I'm doing that. Only to find out God's hand, of his providential hand, is what's really in control. So you get to chapter 17. David gets informed of Absalom's plan. And then, God in the interim, in his providential sovereignty, he's working on Absalom being punished for what happened with him. And so you get to chapter 18, Absalom gets defeated. Okay? Back to God's providence happening. And then Absalom dies. Now, this is an interesting story. You should go read about this. Remember how I told you how physically appealing Absalom was? And one of the things that was appealing about him, it was his hair. Well, he was riding on his horse. His hair got caught in a thicket of trees, low-hanging tree. And, yeah. And then they end up killing him. So that was a hot mess. And so for me, I said, Lord, help me to always remember that my fate is in the hands of a sovereign God. That's you, Lord. Okay, I don't care how much I try and plot, plan, the whole nine. My fate is in your hand, Father. And my question for you is, have you ever been willing to treat the person who deserves severe consequences with gentleness? Because this is what David ordered. When they were going to get Absalom, David had ordered, be gentle with him. Even though he knew Absalom had come to take his throne, was trying to kill him, David still said, treat him with gentleness. And so, have you ever been willing to treat a person who deserves severe consequences, but you decide to treat him with gentleness? I had to think about that question. Okay. So then chapter 19, we get David's kingdom gets restored. Okay. He starts with Judah. Chapter 20, now Sheba is deciding, I'm going to cause a revolt. Okay. And so Sheba caused Israel to officially war against Judah. Because remember, David started recovering his throne and he started with Judah. So there's a whole thing going on. But back to that providential hand of God, guess what? They went to, they were looking for Sheba. They were after him. And there was one town that said, wait. Before you come in and tear up our town, what is it that you want? And they were like, we want Sheba. And you know what they did? They found Sheba in the town, cut his head, threw his head over the wall, and was like, there you go. And they were like, that's all we want, okay. So they were able to save their town. Because they were like, we're not letting one man run our town, because he ran to our town. Okay? And so Joab, remember that was David's commander. Joab had a murderous spirit. And so he found out that there was a man, Amasa, that David was starting to trust and put him in a certain position. And guess what he did? He killed him. Okay? And so then we get chapter 21, and we get justice for the Gibeonites. Okay? So there's a 3-year famine that happened. Okay? Because Saul had done some things to the Gibeonites. And it was time for the consequences of those sins to be paid. And so 7 men of Saul end up dying as a result of that. Okay? They buried Saul's family here. And then David almost gets killed by the Philistine giants, okay, at Gath. And they were like, David, that's it. No more. You don't come to battle with us anymore. You're getting old. You're not, the young warrior you used to be. And so that was the end of him, like going to war. And then chapter 22 is David's song of thanksgiving. And you can find it, like if you compare that to Psalms 18, it's amazing. You should read it. Chapter 23, you get David's last words. Okay, this was devoted to like him, not his last words, like he's dying at this moment, but last words when he's talking about his warriors. Guess who he did not include? Joab. But guess who he did include? Uriah. You know who Uriah is? Bathsheba's husband, the one he had killed. David had him killed. Interesting, isn't it? And then chapter 24, David decides to take a census. Now, this is not good, okay? Because God had made it clear to David that he was the one. It wasn't his army. It wasn't how smart he was. It wasn't what kind of commander he was. God was the source of Israel's strength. But David ends up taking a census, which in general terms, this isn't a bad thing. But for David, it was, because it was going to feed his pride. So he could see, what kind of, how many men he had and the whole nine. And so that made his head big, and that turned into a hot mess. And so here's what God said. Guess what? David, I'm going to let you choose 3 consequences for your sin. All of them, each one got worse. And so David ends up choosing, his consequence. And the thing to remember here in this chapter is sin, even when God forgives it, still has consequences. They're still there. Okay? And so David ends up at the end of the consequence he chose, he ends up buying Mount Moriah. Now, what's interesting about Mount Moriah is this mountain is where Abraham went to offer Isaac. This is also the mountain where Solomon would eventually build the Lord's temple. Isn't that interesting just to consider all of that? And so for me, I said, Lord, help me to remember that some of my sinful choices may leave spiritual harm in the wake of where I have walked. Even when I don't see it, it's still there. It's still there. Somebody else, like my lineage, like my family, like people I love, may walk in it. It doesn't go away. Even God, just because God forgives our sin doesn't mean the consequences go away. And so my question for you is, do you hear God calling you to be on guard regarding your vulnerability to sin and to maintain a heart that's sensitive to the Holy Spirit? That's for you. Think about that for a moment. And then we get 1 Chronicles 21, which is really a recap of what happened with David taking the census. That's what that was about. And then we get Psalms. Okay, and you know how it works for Psalms. I just kind of read you some of my highlight lines from it. It's like a highlight reel. Psalms 3 was confidence in troubled times. But you, O Lord, are a shield around me, my glory and the one who lifts up my head. I lie down and sleep. I wake again because the Lord sustains me. And then we get Psalm 63. Praise God who satisfies. I thirst for you. My body faints for you in a land that is dry, desolate, and without water. My lips glorify you because your faithful love is better than water. And then we get Psalms 34. The Lord delivers the righteous. I will bless the Lord at all times. His praise will always be on my lips. I sought the Lord and he answered me and rescued me from all my fears. Taste and see that the Lord is good. And then we get Psalms 18, which is praise for deliverance. I love you, Lord, my strength. The Lord is my rock, my fortress, and my deliverer. My God, my rock, where I seek refuge, my shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold. I called to the Lord, who is worthy of praise, and I was saved from my enemies. And then we get Romans. So now we're in the New Testament. Chapter 1 of Romans talks about the gospel for Rome. Of course, the gospel means good news. Okay? And it also talks about how the righteous live by faith in the guilt of the Gentile world. Okay? Talks about don't be a secret Christian. All right? And then Paul talked about how he felt obligated to share the gospel, because to not share the gospel had a price that was too high. So Paul considered not sharing this gospel, that I can't do it. Okay, the price is too high. All right, and when you are, for those who are ashamed to share the gospel, you know what that means? You don't fully understand the power that's embedded in it. If you understood the power that was in the gospel, you would lovingly shout it from the rooftop, share it at all times. Okay? And then this is just something to remember. Guess what? Nice sinners are still sinners. Doesn't matter how nice they are. All right? And then chapter 1 kind of tells you how the people of God, they go from idolatry to depravity. Okay? And it says, a person's culture, a person's culture has descended into ultimate corruption when people give public and legal approval of sin. And then you get chapter 2, there's God's judgment. Okay? Knowing that God's judgment is not based on what? Our self-evaluation. It's not based on our self-evaluation of our morals, because the truth can only be measured by God's divine standard. All right? It talks about the Jewish violation of the law. You know how the Jews felt they were superior because they had the law. Okay? It talked about circumcision of the heart. All right? It talks about God's faithfulness is never overcome by our faithlessness. All right? And just because God uses our unrighteousness to show his righteousness does not negate the fact that we broke the law. Okay? We might have righteousness thanks to God giving it to us, but it doesn't negate the fact that we are lawbreakers. Okay? And so for me, I said, Lord, help me to remember that being better than my neighbor means absolutely nothing, because you and only you is a standard, and we all fall short. And my question for you is, do you understand that walking in grace causes you to do the right thing because you're grateful, not because you feel obligated? Think on that for a moment. Walking in grace causes you to do the right thing because you're grateful, not because you feel an obligation to do it. All right, and then chapter 4 of Romans, we have Abraham was justified by faith, because we know works can't save us. It just can't. Okay? Works just provide us with something to brag about. Okay? And there was a scenario in one of the Bibles that I read. It said, the law is like the mirror. When you look in the mirror could show you, some of your flaws. Like, okay, you didn't put your eyeliner on right, or, maybe your line, you just got your hair edged up and it's crooked. Like the mirror shows you these things. So the law shows us our sinful ways. Now, let me tell you what you would not do. I just thought this was such an interesting way to explain this. You wouldn't take the mirror off the wall to try and fix whatever you see wrong. You know how silly that would be? I'm going to take this. I looked in the mirror. I saw that my eyeliner was put on wrong. So you know what I did? I took the mirror to fix my eyeliner. See how silly that is? That's what taking the law, to try and use the law to fix the sin in you. That's what it's like. It's like taking that mirror to fix my eyeliner. The mirror can't fix my eyeliner. The law can't fix your sin. That's why we need a Messiah. That's why. Okay? And so, that ends this week's travels. I will not forget that mirror story. That is the best way to explain that. So anyway, next week's travels include, remember how I said, they must know I'm on summer break. I know some of you all aren't on summer break, but I am. Because look what's happening next week. We got 1 Chronicles 22 through 29. We have 2 Chronicles chapter 1. We have 1 Kings chapter 1 through 4. We have Proverbs, chapters 1 through 2. We have Psalms 78, 42, and 43. And then we have Romans 5 through 9. But you know what? You're off, Jackie. You don't have to work on Monday. So happy traveling to yourself. Anyway, thank you guys for traveling with me. As always, it is amazing to travel with you guys. I have enjoyed these travels through the Word. We're almost halfway through the year. It's so exciting to have done this with you guys. Until next week, happy traveling.